Justin, what are the hidden rules the rulers play by?
Absolutely, Josh. Viktor Efimov, I just came across him earlier today. Link in the description below. Phenomenal video. And this is just a very, very brief part of an incredible thing, but let's get into it right now. Josh, Victor identified 6 methods or 6 priorities when it came to governance. So on my screen, you see at the very bottom, you have war. Then you have genetics, or ways to manipulate people through genetic traits. Then you have economic, ideological, chronological, and methodological. Now, the one at the top, methodological, is the most powerful. It's the most effective, but it's also the one that has the least immediate effect. Likewise, at the very bottom, war is the exact opposite. War is the most immediate, but it is also the least effective. Also, if you look on this side too, everything except war, this type of power that's projected is projected as a cold war versus a hot war, which would be what the war is, number 6. And halfway up, where you've got economic, genetic, and war, these are material means, with ideological, chronological, and methodological being based upon information. Now, here's why this is important. The way something is framed is crucial to the way that the mind will perceive something. So if you start with, let's say, a truth and a lie, people would probably be able to differentiate, or at least the average person theoretically could differentiate relatively easily between a truth and a lie. But if you take the lie and then split the lie into 2 parts, you then give people the choice, or the illusion of choice, but what they really are doing is they're choosing between 2 lies. Victor makes the comment of this. He's like, listen, it's like asking someone to choose between, do we want a socialist economy, or do we want a free market economy? Or what would be another example? Do we want democracy, or do we want a dictatorship? Framing it as you must have either A or B is the incorrect way of looking at it. He uses the example of, let's say, free market versus a planned economy to illustrate the point. Let's say that you want to drive from Houston to Boston or whatever. Well, if it was completely free market, you wouldn't have any, you might not have any roads, people could be driving through the trees, driving through the woods, some going fast, some going slow. It'd be utter bedlam, no traffic signals, etc. I mean, it would truly be free market. But at the same time, if you had this, state apparatus that prescribed exactly when you would drive, how you would drive, how fast you would drive, what path you would drive, even if that path was like ludicrous or whatever, right? That would also be equally as obscene. And his point is that when you look at the synthesis of these two, what you want is, you do want there to be some structure. For example, you build interstates, you have traffic controls, you have, the rules of the road, but then you leave upon the individual actor the autonomy to use whatever resources, and the resources themselves may be fixed, that makes the most sense to get from point A to point B. So if the trucker wants to go on one interstate over another interstate, great. If they want to go slow, great. If they want to go fast, great, or whatever, right? There are some fixed parameters, again, the roads, the rules, etc., but there's still a tremendous amount of degree of autonomy of how the person actually chooses to go through and go from point A to point B. So in other words, you don't want complete anarchy, nor do you want complete stifling top-down control. So it's finding the balance between these 2 things. But in order to do that, you have to see through the illusion of saying, okay, well, listen, it's not this or that. That's the false narrative. And if you think in this frame, you always are going to get it wrong, because the answer is, it's probably some of this and it's probably some of that in the correct proportion as is needed to address whatever situation you run into.
Thomas Sowell teaches us that there are no solutions, there are only alternatives. And the point is that there are no solutions to anything. You can never have a definite answer to any complex question. You can only work around it, and you have to have trade-offs for absolutely everything. And you have to calculate those trade-offs accurately. If you are just making irrational decisions with these blanket yes or no answers, you are going to be in for a rude awakening in the future.
Absolutely. And so getting back to, the ways of dealing with the general means of governance, I mean, this is, I am just like raising the surface of this. But if you, with war or whatever, right, if you go in and you basically, guns, boots on the ground or whatever, right, okay, yeah, that might achieve the short-term objective, but as the phrase goes, you might win the battle, but you end up losing the war because it's immediate, but it's not effective. The genetic, so this is all ways to control people. So like, yes, you can point a gun at someone and control them, okay, but like, that's going to require an incredible amount of overhead, and it's going to exhaust your resources if you don't know how to manage it. So if you go one notch up on the higher on the totem pole, you have ways to control people that are built into their genetics. So the example he uses in this regard would be like alcohol. If you have alcohol, like a beer on one spectrum, to like heroin or fentanyl on the other spectrum, these are ways that you basically tie into someone's inherent vice. And when you tie into someone's inherent vice, like wheat's a good example of this, or like barley or whatever, if you can pacify the population like you would pacify cattle with, booze and porn, nobody's going to actually get up and do anything because they're just too, it's almost like life's too comfortable. But what makes this work, what makes this tick, is there's a genetic, not like defect, but there's a genetic structure that makes the individual human vulnerable to such a thing. The economic, Josh, you and I have talked a lot about this, but think about like using the dollar as the world reserve currency. It's tremendous power that you can use in that front. He talks a lot about that, but you just say the economic is a very clear way that you can project power. Case in point, look at what's going on in Ukraine, right? Or the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a good example of that. Democrats versus Republicans, social or like communists versus free markets versus capitalism or whatever. And the answer is like, yes, there's some truth kind of probably in all of this, but it's framing the issue or whatever, right? Chronological is the ability to rewrite history. And Victor specifically calls out 1984. And there's a great quote, I'm going to butcher it, but I'll do my best here. And it's if you can rewrite history, you can set the context for the future, or it's words to the effect thereof. But the point is, if you can control history and then reshape history, that gives the affirmation for people who are living in the present to understand why they're at where they're at.
And the ability to not be able to question history. Something that I've been having some mental battles with recently is how accurate is the history that we're taught. Topic for another discussion. Justin.
Yeah. The answer is probably not very accurate, but anyways, yeah, separate discussion. And methodological, this is the most powerful way. And this is, where you have the framing, right? Where if you're clever enough to understand the choice of truth, so if you can see the actual truth and the actual lie, but then you take the lie and you subdivide the lie into two parts, people, whatever like sublie A or sublie B they choose, they're still choosing the lie. And if it's beneficial for you, the ruling elite, the people behind the people who are behind the people type, far better to keep the human cattle pacified. And if you can, put blinders on them or control their mind, circumcise their mind in a sense, it's a powerful tool. Anyways, this is just a quickie video. Link in the description below. Please, check out Victor's, full presentation. He gave it, I think, in the early 90s, or the early 90s, or it must have been the early O's, to the KGB or the FSB or whatever it was. But like, top notch. It's a long watch. Just be prepared. Long watch, but it is worth your time.